Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being a part of our FOI equipped guest lecture series. And, this month marks 56 years since the start and finish of the Six-Day War in Israel. And that's why we thought it would be very fitting to have our guest lecturer, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, join us. Dr. Kedar is an Israeli scholar of Arab culture and a lecturer at Bar-Ilan University and the vice president of Newsreel. And I'm hoping that he gets an opportunity to talk about that. But Dr. Kedar, great to see you.
It is great to be here, Chris. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, it's a joy to have you. I know that you have a long history with Friends of Israel as well. You've been to our headquarters. You've spoken to our people. Before we get started, though, I thought maybe people should hear how you as an Israeli became a scholar of Arab culture and history, and even an Arabic speaker yourself. Maybe you could share about that.
Well, originally, I'm not an Arabic speaker. My mother tongue was Yiddish. Both my parents came in the 30s from Poland to the land of Israel. It was years before the state was declared. They came when this country was under the British mandate. And they came from Poland and they spoke Yiddish at home. But however, here in Israel, we, the people who were born already in Israel, we usually do not speak the languages which our parents brought from exile. Neither Yiddish from Europe, nor Arabic from Arabic-speaking countries, or Ladino, which is like Latin or Spanish, which came with the Jews who lived in Spanish-speaking countries. Because part of being an Israeli means to adopt the Hebrew as your language and abandon the language of the galut, of exile. And this some kind of an ideology. So we became Israelis, and as a result, we actually are a new nation, or renewed nation, because now we are not only, we got out of exile, we got exile out of us. And we don't consider ourselves to be anymore like American Jew or Moroccan Jew or Iraqi or Russian. We are Israelis, period. Mm-hmm. And this is actually the change. And as a result, we changed also our behavior. Instead of being a Jew who's running away from place to place in order to survive, now we fight. We give a fight. If needed, we give a fight, which Jews for 2,000 years of exile never fought. They always ran away from, people who persecuted them everywhere, in the Arab world, in Europe, in many other places. Look, in Brazil, there was an Inquisition until 170 years ago. Inquisition in Brazil. Unbelievable. But this is what we experienced through those 19 centuries of exile. Okay, now we are giving fight when needed, and our neighbors apparently do not like it. I was born in 1952, means I am in my 71st year, and I grew up in Tel Aviv, and I went to high school in Tel Aviv, and there was a teacher of Arabic, a Jewish guy who originally came from Germany, but he knew Arabic very well, literary Arabic, not any dialect, but the literal, what we call today modern standard Arabic, which is used in the media, in the law system, in politics. And this is not the colloquial Arabics in plural. This is one modern standard Arabic. And that's what the language which we learned. And this is actually the language which I mastered. After 4 years of high school with Arabic, we have already read parts of the Quran, parts of the Hadith, means the oral tradition, ancient literature, means classical literature, modern literature, editorials in modern newspapers. And when we finished the high school, we could read an Arabic newspaper without the dictionary.
Wow.
Well, we mastered Arabic. So the Israeli IDF took us en bloc, 13 kids, to the intelligence. And I spent 25 years. I served 25 years in the Israeli intelligence, in the 8200 unit. And there I got my language even better. And in the 90s, I started my PhD. I learned from BA in the early 80s, and in the 90s, I worked on my PhD. And when I was released from the army in the rank of Brigadier General in 1995, I started to write my thesis about the Syrian press, about the language, or the linguistics of the Syrian regime. Since then, since the 1995, I was teaching at Bar Ilan. I retired a year ago, but I continue to instruct some students to MA and PhD. And in addition, I'm a speaker, frequent speaker in Arabic media, since I speak Arabic fluently. So I represent Israel in the most difficult arenas like Al Jazeera and the BBC in Arabic and many others. In addition to commentary on Arab and Islamic issues in the Israeli media, in papers, in TV stations, and all kinds of media outlets. So I'm very busy. And once in a while, I go to the States to give lectures, as I gave in the Front of Israel headquarters in South New Jersey, overlooking Philadelphia. I remembered it until this very day.
You know, we were supposed to have you come and join us in person just prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic prevented that from happening. But I'm thankful for this Zoom opportunity. So let's get to the 6-Day War, Dr. Kedar. Can you share about the background of the 6-Day War? What was going on in the Arab world and what was going on in Israel that was ultimately bringing this clash between multiple Arab nations and Israel in 1967?
Well, first of all, I was in 1967, I was 15 years old. Means a guy who understands very well what goes around. We already was in the high school, and the teacher, the Arabic teacher, Dovi Iron, may he rest in peace, explained to us everything, so we knew exactly what we are facing. Israel was facing an existential threat. Don't forget that those days, Israel was very thin, was very small. It's before we liberated Judea and Samaria and occupied other parts of like Sinai Desert and the Golan. And Israel was so narrow that in the narrowest place between the sea and Tulkarem, the airport of Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth, cannot get into this space.
That's wild.
To that degree, Israel was actually squished between Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. And in the narrowest place, you couldn't stick the Dallas Fort Worth airport to that degree. And this size of Israel, so small and so thin and so vulnerable, made our neighbors and our enemies actually very greedy. Means they hoped that with one shot or one hit, Israel will collapse altogether. And this is actually the atmosphere which we lived in during the first 19 years of the state, after parts of the country were illegally occupied by Jordan, what Judea and Samaria, what they call the West Bank, including ancient Jerusalem, our capital, ancient capital since the days of David and Solomon. But the Jordanians couldn't care less. And by the way, the Jordanians in those years were, with the army, Jordanian army was under British commandment. To that degree, Britain was not friendly with us. Yet, Israel, and don't forget, those days we were after the Holocaust, which finished in 1945. But for good 5 years, Jews were exterminated in thousands every day, in Auschwitz, in Birkenau, in Chelmno, in Sobibor, in Treblinka, in many of those death camps. And many of the Israelis those days were actually Holocaust survivors who came in the age of 30 or 40, people with, with physical abilities. They are not old as they are today. They were young. And they had to rebuild themselves psychologically, first of all, physically, and from the community point of view as well. And many, so most of the people in Israel came from the ashes of Europe. People who survived 6 years of war, which the Second World War, and this actually most of the people here in Israel were. So for them to live in an existential threat actually pushed them back to the death camps psychologically, and this is why they felt. I'm talking about my parents' age, means my parents' generation. They felt like fighting with their back to the sea, means that they cannot afford being defeated. This is why the 6-Day War was actually a war for existence. Now, after the 1948 war, which definitely was a war of, to extermination, because when 5 Arab armies invaded Israel 1 day after it declared its independence in mid-May of 1948, they didn't want to liberate the occupied territories. There was no occupied territories those days, because what later became the occupied territories was under, Jordanian rule and Egyptian rule, and whatever they took from our country. They wanted to abolish the whole Israeli state, although it was recognized by the world, and they wanted to slaughter us all in 1948. The same thing was in 1967. And this is what we felt. And the war actually started, or the preparation to war was actually a deterioration of the situation. It started when Gamal Abdel Nasser, the herald of the Arab nationalism, closed the Tiran Straits to the south from Eilat, means to choke Israel or the Israeli south. After all, we had a harbor, but what can you do in a harbor when the gate to the harbor, the Tiran Straits, are blocked by Egypt, which is a violation of the international law? You are not allowed to block an international passage of water. But Gamal Abdel Nasser could not care less about international law, being backed by the Soviet Union those days. So he blocked the Tiran Straits, in spite of the fact that it was illegal. Then he streamed his army to Sinai, and the Egyptian army was very big, especially compared to the Israeli army. And not only this, we saw the Jordanians also threatening Tel Aviv and threatening Jerusalem with their cannons, which they, by the way, British cannons named Long Tom, very heavy cannons, which were shooting shells of 25 inches, 25-inch width or diameter of shells. This thing weighs like a car. And these were the ammunition which the Jordanians were shooting on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Okay, this is what we were experiencing those days. And the Syrians who threatened the Israeli north. And this actually what we experienced on that war. Three big armies supported by the Iraqi army, which sent a big unit to Syria because we don't share a border with Iraq. So they sent a convoy with a whole battalion or whole brigade to Syria. So all these armies together planned to invade Israel and to put an end to this country altogether. And this actually was the eve of the Six-Day War. However, when you feel that you are pushed to the corner, you don't see anything in your eyes, you just fight. And this is actually what happened there. Within 6 days, actually 3 days, we crashed the Egyptian army in Sinai. And the other 3 days, we dealt with the Syrian army in the Golan. We occupied the Sinai desert. We occupied the Golan in order to defend our kibbutzim and all these settlements, all these farms which were living under the range of the cannons from both Egypt and Syria. And we liberated the West Bank from the illegal Jordanian occupation, which lasted for 19 years. And of course, we liberated Jerusalem, our forefathers' capital, which is ours today. And this is actually that war, because of the pressure which we felt, we gave a giant fight, a fight which I think I don't know if there was a nation which fought such a fight for 6 days in order to liberate itself from a threat to slaughter everybody. And a nation which fights for its existence actually gives the most powerful fight. And unfortunately, almost 700 Israelis were killed in that war. Most of them are, of course, soldiers, reserve soldiers. And as a result, we occupied large spaces, like 3 times as big as Israel. But we knew that these territories will not stay under our occupation forever. And with the years, we gave up on Sinai to Egypt on the price for peace. Means as long as Egypt did not make peace with us, we didn't release these territories. And the peace came in 1977, Sadat initiative, and the peace was signed in March of 1979, and we gave Egypt back the desert of Sinai. With Syria, we are still waiting for peace, and Israelis, some of them assume that the Golan Heights might be given back to the Syrians when they are ready for peace with us. Yet, since Syria today is in much bigger problems, I don't see any peace with Syria in the horizon, especially if Iran takes Syria over. So, meanwhile, for 56 years already, we are in the Golan. We live in the Israeli cities and a place of farms which were built on the Golan. I served some of my army service on the Golan, on the Hermon mountain, overlooking Syria and listening to whatever was coming out from there. And yes, and we love the Golan, and the Golan we turned the Golan from being a launching pad for missiles and cannons and mortars. Now the Golan is flourishing, blooming, a piece of land which feeds Europe with the wheat and apples and everything. So
Dr. Kedar, can I ask you, it's phenomenal what you're saying. I'm interested, going back to the beginning here of the 6-Day War too, I'm interested to know, I've heard it said before that the Arab world was certainly unified in wanting to destroy Israel, which is something I think you had said. But I also heard that they were somewhat disorganized and incohesive. I might have even heard that the king of Morocco had helped Israel out in some way as the Arab nations were meeting to talk about this war in Morocco. If it's true that they were disorganized, what was disorganized about them? Why were they incohesive? Was there even a tension between Jordan and Egypt at this time as well?
Well, for this you have to understand the Arab world. Since the Arab League was established in 1945, the Arab world was sharply divided between two kinds of states. One kind is the modern states, which were established on a European paradigm of president, parliament, government, judicial system, elections once in a while, and like Syria as it was in that time, like Iraq, like I wouldn't say Libya, but Yemen, which was Marxist for a while. And these countries actually were conglomerates of ethnic groups like Arabs and Kurds and Turkmens and Berbers, of clans, of religious groups like Muslims, Christians, Alawis, Druze, Yazidis, and others, and sectarian groups like Shia and Sunni. These countries tried to ignore all these differences between groups of the society and to impose on everybody the socialism. The Ba'ath Party, both in Iraq and in Syria, was socialist party. Also Egypt, under the Arab Socialism Party, was a socialist. In Yemen, they were Marxists to that degree, and their inspiration came from the Soviet Union. And their weapons were Soviet from the Soviet Union. Their economy was connected to the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, and they were definitely part of the Eastern Bloc, means the Russia, Soviet Union, and the countries which were united in the Warsaw Pact. The other countries, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Jordan, Libya until 1969, and later, since the 70s, the Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait formerly also, were all, I would say, contra-revolutionary. They were led by kings, these old-fashioned kingdom or regime, or emirs, which are more or less the same. They didn't have any parties, any elections. They were, much more connected to the tradition of the Middle East, especially Islam. Don't forget that the socialism of the other countries was actually against Islam, at least implicitly, if not also explicitly. So these traditional countries, the kingdoms, were very traditional, were very conservative, connected to Islam. Just look at Saudi Arabia. And they were threatened constantly by the revolutionary countries, Egypt, mainly Syria, Iraq, and their friends. So in order to protect themselves, they went to the West in order to have shelter under the auspice of the United States of America, NATO, Western Europe. So they were more or less with the West. And in order to pay for the protection, they actually supplied the West with oil. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and other countries. And those years, don't forget, the oil in the Northern Sea to the north from Britain was not yet found. And also the oil in Mexico Bay was not yet found. So the West, means United States, Europe, Western Europe, were addicted to the Gulf oil to that degree. So this was actually the division between the modern countries the revolutionary socialist countries in the Middle East, led by Egypt, against the group of the traditional and conservative countries led by Saudi Arabia against them. And the hatred which was within the Arab world between these two groups of countries was tremendous, to a degree that some of them, like Jordan and Morocco, would cooperate with Israel against the Arab radical countries like Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. In 1969, a disaster happened when the king of Libya, Idris al-Sanusi, was ousted by Gaddafi, and Gaddafi turned the direction of Libya from being conservative kingdom to be modern socialist country. What happened recently, since 2010, the Arab Spring actually, or what was called the Arab Spring, actually brought the modern countries, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Egypt to a degree, Yemen, of course, to dysfunctionality. They are dysfunctional because of the riots which accompany the Arab world. And today these countries do not function. So who can now breathe? Who can now feel that they are free? All the traditional conservative countries like Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and now they can do whatever they like with Israel in the open air. They don't have to hide. So the Emirates have peace with us, the Abraham Accords. So is Morocco and Bahrain, of course. And nobody has any problem because the countries which were opposing this trend struggle to survive. Look at Libya, look at Iraq, look at Syria. Okay, so this is actually a little introduction to the Middle East. But those days, in 1967, the Arab world was still led by the radical countries, means the socialist countries, especially Egypt under Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was depicted in the Arab media as the prophet of the Arab nationalism. Okay, not religious issues, no nationalism. Of course, socialist, but this is actually what they meant. So this is the atmosphere. And don't forget that since those countries are conglomerates, means the socialist countries are conglomerates of different groups which never became a nation, they need an external enemy in order to galvanize everybody under the illegal aegis of an illegal ruler like Assad or Saddam Hussein or Gamal Abdel Nasser and his successors, Sadat and Mubarak. So they needed an external enemy. And Israel was there to be the enemy. And once in a while, you have to make a war with Israel in order to show that the Zionists are willing to kill us all. So leave all the differences, leave all the problems which you have with us, and come under our aegis, and let's be together. And this is why Syria never made peace with Israel, because they needed Israel as an enemy in order to push everybody under the aegis of the illegal Assad regime. And this is what explains the fact that Egypt has no tribes over there because of the high dam, which actually destroyed the Egyptian society. And today, the Egyptian society is a society of individuals, not clans, unlike Yemen, unlike other countries. So,
Dr. Kedar, Dr. Kedar, Steve Herzig here. I just have to ask you, especially our listeners, of which we're recording you in order for them to learn. You were 15 years old. This war had three fronts to it. The north, eventually Jordan got in on the east, and then the south, Egypt. What was your personal feelings, and what was at the beginning, what was the atmosphere like in Israel? This was a surprise preemptive attack. Your insight as an individual and remembering the government, the newspapers at that time, what was the tenor of the nation during this amazing 6 day? It's the most amazing time, I think, in the modern state of Israel's history.
You know what? I actually saw it with my eyes. Not far from my home, like half a mile, there was a big stadium, the Maccabiah Stadium, in northern Tel Aviv, where we were watching soccer games once a week, twice a week. Prior to the war, we have 3 weeks of waiting. Prior to the war, group of like 20 bulldozers came to that stadium and dug a giant hole in the earth. Giant. The whole stadium was actually dug as a whole in order to bury people in the war. To that degree, we were afraid that we're going to be experiencing bombing from these countries, and people will be killed in the streets, and the army will have casualties. And the plan was to bury these people as they are, without extermination, without discrimination, without even identifying the people, because we were afraid also from gas missiles, which Egypt was using, at least was apparently having those days, because they were using gas against the royal regime in Yemen in 1962. 5 years before the war, the Egyptians were shooting the Yemenites in Yemen with gas bombs, and Yemenites were dying like cockroaches in Yemen. And so we knew that the Egyptians have chemical warheads of whatever, and if they use them against Arabs in Yemen, will they refrain from using them against us? And we know that the ex-German engineers from Nazi Germany were developing missiles in Egypt, the Al-Zafir, Al-Qahir, giant missiles with chemical warheads, which will be launched to Tel Aviv and to other places in Israel. So this is why the government dug that stadium, and I saw in my eyes, because people were talking about this. I didn't believe, and I went to see if this is right or wrong. It was right, and I saw this giant ditch in the ground. The whole stadium was dug, and the piles of sand around it in order to be pushed by bulldozers on the people who might die with from the gas, because you cannot even treat these bodies if they are gassed to death, because you will be gassed. So
did you discuss this with your family, your parents, siblings, friends, seeing all these things happen? What was the discussion like 3 weeks before?
Everybody was talking about this, that we are preparing for another Holocaust, because the Egyptians will use, or maybe the Syrians as well, chemical weapons, as they used 5 years earlier in Yemen. So this was the 3 weeks of fear. Later, we found out why the government here waited for 3 weeks. On those days, Israel was very, very short on ammunition. And Israel was also had very bad experience with the American administration, because the American presidency maintained pressure on Israel in 1956 to withdraw from Sinai after we took part of Sinai in order to stop the terror attacks on the Israeli south from Sinai. This was the Sinai operation. Yet we had to withdraw from Sinai three months later in January of 1957 because of American pressure. So Eshkol, Levi Eshkol, the prime minister of Israel in the Six-Day War in 67, he sent the head of the Mossad, Meir Amit, to Washington, D.C. to meet with the highest level of the American administration in order to make sure prior to the war that after the war, if we win, the United States will not maintain any pressure on us in order to keep the advantages from the war. And Meir Amit was there, and he met with McNamara. He was then the Secretary of Defense. I don't remember his first name. John, maybe? I don't remember.
I don't
McNamara.
remember either.
McNamara was his name. And when Meir Amit, the head of the Mossad, was sitting with McNamara, willing to get the consent of America not to maintain pressure on us and maybe to supply us with ammunition if needed, McNamara pick up the phone, called the president, I think it was Lyndon Johnson, and he says, Meir Amit, the head of the Mossad, the Israel Mossad, is sitting with me, and he put it on speaker. And he's asking if there is a war, he wants our cooperation in A, B, and C. So Johnson said, you got it. It's okay with me. So he closed the phone, and Meir Amit called Israel, called Levi Eshkol, the prime minister, and told him, yes, we have green light from the Americans. So a day later, the war started. Israel started it. After Israel failed, and Israel actually started it with what we call in Hebrew Mivtza Moked. This was an operation for 3 hours where the Israeli Air Force actually attacked the air forces of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. The Egyptian Air Force was totally destroyed in this attack. The Syrian Air Force was totally destroyed. The Jordanian as well. The Iraqi was not destroyed, but was hit. And so was the Lebanese one. And now Israel could fight for 6 days without having to deal with Air Force in the Arab side. So that's why Israel won in 6 days a war. Actually, it was 3 vis-a-vis Egypt and 3 vis-a-vis Syria, and in between Jordan as well. So since they didn't have air forces, Israel could operate on the ground much better, and this is why we succeeded to defeat them within 6 days. However, and here comes the big however, the ramifications of this war, I think, are visible until this very day. Because in the Arab world, what got the biggest hit was the idea of Arab nationalism. Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was viewed, as I said, as the prophet of Arab nationalism, he got hit so tremendously that 3 years later he died out of heart attack. He couldn't bear the consequences of the war anymore. And most of the Arabs actually abandoned the idea of nationalism. And later, 10, 12 years later, after the Iranian revolution, the religious trend in the Arab world became the substitute to the Arab nationalism. And we saw a religious revival in the Islamic world, which was the result of the defeat or the collapse of the national idea. The religious one came instead. After all, the national one was meant to replace the religious one. So here we have a competition between ideas. When one is defeated, the other one wins. So the Islamism which you see today is one of the results of the 6-day war.
Wow.
However, and here comes the big however, Israel succeeded to liberate Jerusalem. Jerusalem, as you know, is the third place in holiness for the Sunni Islam, not the Shi'i, because the Shi'i Islam has another city, the third place in holiness, which is Najaf in southern Iraq. But the Sunni world, which is the majority of the Islamic world, for them, Jerusalem is viewed as the third place in holiness. Here, we annex East Jerusalem with Al-Aqsa Mosque. By the way, Al-Aqsa originally was not in Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa, in the days of the Prophet Muhammad, was in a place named Ju'rana, near Mecca, in the Arab Peninsula. It was brought to Jerusalem, means the idea that Al-Aqsa is in Jerusalem was invented by the Umayyads dynasty as a kind of competition with Mecca. Because
for our listeners too, Dr. Kedar, Al-Aqsa is the mosque on the Temple Mount next to the Dome of the Rock, so they can kind of orient themselves. Yes, today.
But this is a forgery of the Umayyads, because the Al-Aqsa, which is mentioned in the Quran, was not originally in Jerusalem, was actually in Ju'rana, near Mecca. But 50 years after Muhammad died, the Umayyad dynasty claimed that the Al-Aqsa, which is mentioned in the Quran, is actually in Jerusalem. They sanctified Jerusalem on the expense of Mecca in order to create a center for themselves. After all, they settled in this area and they abandoned the Hijaz, what today Saudi Arabia is. So the Jerusalem was sanctified, and Al-Aqsa was declared to be in Jerusalem only because political issues of the Islamic state or the Islamic empire which started in 682 CE. This whole forgery, and Arab historians talk about this explicitly, and whoever studies Arab history or Islamic history knows this fact. But still today they stick to the lies because they have a problem with Judaism. And here comes the problem. When we liberated Jerusalem, they cannot fathom it. Why? According to Islam, Judaism is null and void, cancelled, because they took the Christian theory of replacement one step forward. Because according to the Islam, not radical Islam, according to the regular Islam, Islam came to the world to replace both Judaism and Christianity. Both Christians and Jews should live under the auspice of Islam, under the yoke of Islam as dhimmis, people with almost no rights. They have to pay jizya, means skull tax, when they are humiliated, as it's stated in the Quran. They have to live under the auspice of Islam. They have no right to states. Both Jews and Christians have no right to states, no right to army, police, ministries. They don't have all these rights because Jews and Christians should be living under the auspice of Islam, according to Islam. And here, with the help of the Christians, since the establishing of the State of Israel, and don't forget, Lord Balfour, with the Balfour Declaration, was an evangelical Anglican, Christian, devout Christian. So the whole State of Israel is a collaboration between the Christian world and the Jewish world against Islam. And now they are bringing Jews to the land of Israel. And in 1948, they established a state. Since when Jews have a right to a state? And they have an army, and they have a police, and they have a government, and they occupy Jerusalem, and they want to pray on the Temple Mount. And all this means the State of Israel and its sovereignty and Jerusalem and praying on Temple Mount, for them it means that Judaism goes through a process of resurrection. Means Jewish religion comes back to life with the help of the Christian religion means that this is a global conspiracy against Islam by Judaism or by Jews and Christians in order to bring Jews back to life, to bring Judaism back to life in the form of a state on the land of Israel, with Jerusalem as its capital, and Jews, hell's bells, and Jews are praying on the Temple Mount. And this they cannot fathom, they cannot accept it, they cannot get it, they cannot understand it, because for them, all this process actually brings a question mark on Islam. Since Judaism came back to life thanks to Christianity, we know all these countries which recognized Israel and America and Europe and Britain. What will be the Islam which came to the world to replace these two religions? This is why the mere existence of the state of Israel, and especially the Israeli government of Jerusalem, and particularly Jews praying on Temple Mount, for them this is a theological threat on Islam before it is anything connected to territorial issues or legal issues or political issues or I don't know what other issues or legal issues. This is a religious problem. And this is, in my humble view, the worst ramification and result of the 6-day war when we liberated Jerusalem from the illegal Jordanian occupation.
Dr. Kedar.
And this exists until this very day.
The Friends of Israel takes tours to Israel. We have been since 1977. I'm around your age, and I started to come to Israel in the early 80s. The number one question when we take people to the Western Wall, when we talk to them about the political situation, they understand the miracle of the 6-day war. Tell us the difficulty, the conundrum that Israel has, because the question always is, why did they give back the Temple Mount? Why didn't they conquered it, they won, why didn't they give it back? We know how strategic it is, you just outlined. Give us a sample or at least a cursory understanding for our watchers and listeners. What's at stake as it relates to the Temple Mount for Islam?
Well, Jerusalem is holy, as I mentioned, to the Sunni Islam, not to the Shia Islam. The Shia started to speak about Jerusalem only in 1979 after the Khomeini revolution. Okay? And the Shia exists already 14 centuries. But most of the time, the Shia never talked about Jerusalem. On the contrary, those who sanctified Jerusalem were the enemies of the Shia, the Umayyads. So this for Islam, it's not that Jerusalem is holy for Islam. Jerusalem is holy or considered to be holy only within Sunni circles, not within Shia. This is the first thing. But the Shia also shares this idea that Judaism is null and void. This is why Jews are not allowed, should not be allowed to go back to Jerusalem, to the land of Israel anyway, and of course to pray on the Temple Mount. And this, they share this idea as well, because the Shia also believes that Judaism is null and void. However, and here comes a very, very important thing. You talk about the Western world. The Western world was a substitute for many, many years. I'm talking about more than 1,000 years, for Jews to pray in the closest place to the Temple Mount. The Western wall at the outside of the Western Wall is not the Temple Mount. It is Jerusalem, but it's not the Temple Mount. But Jews were not allowed to go to the Temple Mount, whether because of the Jewish halakha, the Jewish law, because we have to be pure in order to go into the Temple Mount, and we don't have the ability to be pure these days because of the procedure of purification of the people needs a temple. So since we don't have the temple these days, we cannot be really pure from the situation which we are. So this is why Jews refrained for 2,000 years to go onto the Temple Mount, to the Haram Sharif, the Arab cause. So praying near the Western Wall, which is outside, was the closest place which you could go as a Jew to that place. Not to mention the fact that neither Christians until as long as the Byzantines were there, and later the Muslims, they usually did not let Jews perform any religious ceremonies in Jerusalem in general, and of course in the Temple Mount, because both were afraid that Judaism will come back to life. Look, when the times of the Byzantine Empire, for hundreds of years, Jews were not allowed to go into Jerusalem. Only the Islamic occupation of 638, only then Jews were allowed to go into Jerusalem. But until then, for hundreds of years, Jews were forbidden from coming into Jerusalem, just like Mecca of today. So this is in very short. But the main thing is that we have to remember that for Muslims, and as a result of the 6-day war, when we Jews liberated our ancient capital, the capital of David and Solomon and Solomon's descendants, the Muslims cannot fathom it, and they cannot agree to it, because for them Israel is a deed of Satan, and Israel has absolutely no right to exist. Now the Palestinians actually produce this scarf when they go around in demonstrations. Also in the United States, I saw it. On one, and this is the PLO. You can see this is the PLO flag.
Mm-hmm.
This is the PLO flag. On one side it says Al-Quds Lana in Arabic, means Jerusalem is ours. Since when Jerusalem is theirs? But they write here Al-Quds Lana, Jerusalem is ours. Okay. The other side is this, and it says Palestine. The entire country, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Okay. This one, and they know the connection, because if they succeed to take Jerusalem, as they claim that Jerusalem should be the capital of the Palestinian state, they will have the whole country, because there is no Zionism without Zion.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand it. And they understand it very well. And this is why this is one scarf. They want Zion. They want, in order to abolish Zionism and have Palestine all over the country. And they understand the connection between Jerusalem and the land of Israel. And this is why they demand to have Jerusalem as their capital, although Jerusalem was never, not even one day in history, any capital of any Arab or Islamic state, let alone Palestinian state, which never existed. But this demand is supported, unfortunately, by Arabs, by Muslims, and lo and behold, even in the United States of America, there are people, in the Congress included, who believe that Israel should withdraw from the Jewish capital, Jerusalem, and to hand it to people who never had a state in this country and never had Jerusalem as its capital.
Dr. Kedar, that I want to wrap up our guest lecture series here on the 6-Day War. You've been talking about the lingering effects of the 6-Day War, and you were focusing on the Muslim side, on the region, what was going on in the region. I want to turn it over more now toward foreign policy, especially from the United States and from Western countries, because it's interesting that the effects of the 6-Day War are still lingering on in foreign policy. And, my mind goes to the fact that it was the Trump administration, decades later, that was the first president to actually walk up to the Western Wall and to and to visit the Western Wall. You have to think 1967 is when Jerusalem was liberated, and it wasn't until 2020 or so when a president approaches the Western Wall because he's trying to show that Jerusalem is unified. It's not divided. It isn't east. It isn't west. It is the capital of the state of Israel. But even embassies don't move to Jerusalem because of what the results of not only the Independence War, but the Six-Day War. Could you briefly talk about that in the remaining time that we have?
Well, there is a law which was accepted by the Congress and the Senate ever since 1995, if I remember well, which declares that the United States of America considers United Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. And therefore, the embassy should move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And this is a law which was accepted by the Congress and the Senate. Yet, every year, ever since 1995, every president since then, except for Trump, was signing every year an executive order which postpones the implementation of this law, until Trump did not sign it. And upon this law, the United States considered Jerusalem to be the capital of the state of Israel, and the embassy, or at least parts of the embassy, or officially, the embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, according to the American law, which existed already 25 years before Trump did it. Okay? He should be blessed for implementing the American law. Okay? By the way, I think all the candidates, both Republican and Democrats, who were appearing in front of AIPAC every single year since 1995, promised time and again that they will move the embassy to Jerusalem. Yet the only one who actually did it was Trump. All his predecessors promised, but never stood to the promise. Amazing. Mm-hmm. But this is what happened. And thank God, we are in our capital. And today, Jerusalem enjoys the freedom of religion for Muslims, for Christians, for Jews, whoever wants to come, blessed be he. And Jerusalem is as open as it was never under Islamic rule, which was in Jerusalem until 67.
Dr. Kedar, Dr. Kedar, I want to know, Egypt took back Sinai. I know Syria would love to take back Golan. Why didn't Jordan and Israel made a peace plan? Why didn't the Hashmonite kingdom want Judea Samaria back, or as we know it here in the West as the West Bank? Why didn't they take that back? Why didn't he want that land back for peace?
Because according to the partition plan of 1947, Jordan ends in the Jordan River, Jordan Valley. Jordan does not have the West Bank. West Bank was occupied, and this occupation, including Jerusalem, was not recognized even by the Arab world. Even by the Arab world did not recognize the legality of the Jordanian occupation of the West Bank, and of course East Jerusalem. Why? Because Jordan was a kingdom, and the Arab world was led by the radical countries, the socialist countries who were against the kingdoms, as I mentioned before. And here you are, the domestic Arab feuds and struggles also had this. Only two countries in the world recognized the legality of the Jordanian occupation of the West Bank. One was Britain, and the other was Pakistan. So the world in general did not recognize the legality of this occupation. This is why Israel could say to Jordan in 1994, when we signed the peace agreement, this part of the land does not belong to you. You occupied it for 19 years illegally, it doesn't belong to you, especially Jerusalem. Now, the King Hussein, who signed the peace with us, he did not want to have the shame of having back the Judea and Samaria without Jerusalem, because he knew that Israel will never give up on its capital. So he didn't want the whole thing partially. So he said, okay, take it and deal. You can deal now with the Palestinians. He hates the Palestinians. He hated them tremendously. And for him, not getting back the West Bank, for him it was some kind of relief, because he has enough Palestinians in Jordan who are the majority of the population. They didn't need and didn't want more Palestinians who live in the so-called West Bank. So he was more or less happy to get rid of them, so he didn't insist on getting them. By the way, Sadat also, we occupied the Gaza Strip from Egypt in 1967. Yet when the peace was signed or negotiated between Begin and Sadat between November 77 and March 79, Sadat refused to take Gaza back because he said it's not part of Egypt. You deal with the Palestinians. I don't want them. He hated them. So between Sadat, who didn't want the Palestinians of Gaza, and Hussein, who didn't want the Palestinians of Judea and Samaria, we got stuck with them. But little by little, we released them because Gaza, we got out of Gaza. Gaza is functioning like a state. And the Judea and Samaria one day will implement the 7 Emirate solution. Emirates in Hebron, the city of Hebron, Emirate in Jericho, and everyone in Ramallah, Nablus, Qalqilia, and Jenin, and Qalqilia as well, and Tulkarm. And these are the 7 Emirates which I recommend to establish in the Arab cities of Judea and Samaria, while Israel should forever remain in the rural areas, and Israel should offer Israeli citizenship to the villagers, which are like 15% of the population, and that's all. So this is how to solve the Palestinian problem in a way which has some kind of prospects to succeed, like the Emirates in the Gulf, rather than building another Arab state like Syria or Iraq with many groups which never galvanized to be one group, which will collapse like Syria and Iraq.
That's right. Well, listen, everybody, you've been listening to Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Wow. I mean, this was just amazing in every way. You got a lecture. I think some people spend a lot of money to go to school to hear from Dr. Kedar when you got a lecture on the 6-Day War, and not only the effects of the 6-Day War in the Muslim world, but also foreign policy. Man, you heard it all. I could sit here for another 2 hours. Dr. Kedar, you're such a blessing to us. Can you let our listeners know how they can maybe connect with you? Do you have a newsletter, the programs that you're a part of? How can they connect with you and keep up with what you're doing, Dr. Kedar?
Well, since I'm the vice president of a company named Newsrael, and I highly recommend that everyone will download this application. It's a free application which gives news about Israel, Middle East, and related topics and related issues. It's Newsrael, Newsrael. You can download it from your app store, whether you use Android or iPhone. You have both, and use it for free to learn about Israel. Since I'm the vice president of this company, my email address is Kedar, Kedar, @newsrael.com.
That's great. We will put all those things in the chat. Hey, I've got my app ready to go here, Dr. Kedar. Thank you very much.
This is this.
And we will be sure to push this as well for all those who are interested in keeping up with news coming out of Israel, especially from a specialist, a scholar like Dr. Kedar. Thank you so much for being a part of our FOI Equip program. Dr. Kedar, God bless and have a great night.
Thank you,
Chris, it
Dr.
was a
Kedar.
pleasure and honor to be here, and I thank you so much for giving me the pulpit.